British California, the plaque that establishes England's claim. It is a crisp, wind-chilled day in Northern California. The waves lap against the rocky shore north of the Golden Gate, where a solitary figure in a wide-brimmed hat sips from a thermos of tea. Beryl Shin, an amateur historian and fervent lover of local folklore, is enjoying a peaceful picnic beneath the cool shade of a gnarled cypress tree. The wind whispers through the tall grasses, and the scent of salt water mingles with the earthy aroma of the surrounding landscape. Little does she know, as she idly surveys the jagged coastline, that her lunch break will soon become a profound moment in history. As she stands up to stretch her legs, her foot strikes something metallic beneath the underbrush. Curiosity piqued, she brushes aside the leaves and dirt, revealing an old brass plaque half buried in the ground. The plaque, weathered and eroded by decades, if not centuries, of exposure to the elements, is inscribed with text so faded that it takes every ounce of her sharp-eyed focus to decipher it. What Shin holds in her hands that day is no relic of Spanish exploration, nor a token of the Mexican period. It is a British marker, a symbol of England's attempt to lay claim to California during the early 19th century, at a time when the region was a contested land teetering between Spanish and Russian influence, with American expansion looming on the horizon. Shin could hardly believe what she had uncovered. It was a discovery that would challenge everything we know about California's colonial past. The discovery of the plaque, located on a bluff overlooking the wild Pacific, may seem like an ordinary accident, but it would soon emerge as a landmark moment in the retelling of California's history. Beryl Shin's find, buried and nearly forgotten by time, would reveal a lesser-known chapter of American history, one in which Britain, not Spain or Mexico, might have been the first to officially claim California as its own. The plaque, though it had been obscured by overgrowth and the unforgiving sea breeze, still bore a remarkable inscription. In its faded words, Shin would eventually read the phrase, "The British claim of the western coast of North America, 1825. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard whispers about British interest in the California coast, but this tangible piece of history raised far more questions than it answered. Who had placed this plaque? Why had it been forgotten? Was this, as some suggested, part of a larger effort by Britain to lay claim to California, long before the United States expanded westward? What were the ramifications of this find, both for the history of California and the broader geopolitics of the 19th century? Before Spain's dominance of the California coast came to a close with Mexican independence in 1821, British explorers, traders, and agents had been deeply involved in the region. While Spain had monopolized California as a colony, Britain had long eyed the territory with covetous interest. From as early as the late 18th century, British explorers like James Cook had mapped the coast, and British traders had begun to frequent the Pacific in search of lucrative fur trade opportunities. But it was not until the early 1800s, when British imperial ambitions began to stretch across the Pacific, that California became a real point of contention. Britain's interest in California, particularly the area around the Golden Gate, was spurred by the region's strategic value. It sat on a narrow strip of land that connected the Pacific Ocean to the vast interior of North America, an area rich in natural resources and positioned advantageously for trade. One significant event occurred in 1821 when the British Navy, under the command of Captain George Vancouver, conducted a detailed survey of the Pacific coast, which included what is now California. During the mission, Vancouver and his crew made several stops along the coast and placed markers in various locations. These were not formal territorial claims, but rather exploratory markers, noting areas of interest and potential future colonial endeavors. Vancouver's survey, while primarily focused on mapping the coastline, was also an implicit assertion of British interest in the region. However, it wasn't just exploration that fueled British ambitions. As early as 1823, British fur traders and merchants, particularly those from the Hudson's Bay Company and other Pacific Northwest ventures, began setting up shop along the coast. It was from this nexus of trade and exploration that the British interest in California grew. The Hudson's Bay Company, which had long been a major force in the fur trade, had established strong trading posts along the Columbia River and other parts of the Pacific Northwest. British interests along the California coast were tied to the same economic drive, the fur trade. The land was rich with pelts and other resources that could be traded for profit, particularly with China and other Asian markets. California, though not fully colonized by Britain, was nevertheless seen as a valuable resource. Thus, the idea of a British claim to the region began to take root. The question was not if Britain could lay claim, but when. In the context of global geopolitics, Britain was facing challenges from both Russia and Spain. The Russians were pushing southward from their settlements in Alaska, while Spain, which had traditionally held sway over California, was weakened by internal revolution and external pressure from other European powers. In 1825, as Britain looked to solidify its presence on the west coast, a small group of British explorers, possibly led by a lesser-known captain or naval officer, went to the trouble of placing this plaque along the northern shore of what is today known as the Golden Gate. This was not an official action sanctioned by the British government, but rather the private work of a few ambitious explorers who sought to assert British interests in the region. The plaque, now confirmed by Shin and historians to be a genuine relic, represented a small but significant gesture, the establishment of a British California. Its text was clear enough to suggest that Britain, in 1825, laid claim to the territory of California as its own. It is possible that the plaque was intended to serve as a sign of Britain's interests in the region, much like a flag planted in the sand. However, it would remain largely unnoticed for decades. Its position on the remote, windswept coastline only added to the sense of abandonment it would later endure. The British government, at the time, did not actively pursue this claim with force or official recognition. Instead, it remained a subtle statement, perhaps too subtle. By the time the plaque was placed, Spain's grip on California had already begun to weaken, and Mexico's control over the region was soon to take hold. The United States, driven by the ideology of manifest destiny, was preparing to extend its reach westward, though it would be years before California became a U.S. state. Had the British acted on their claim, however, they might have faced resistance from both Spain and the United States. Spain would have fought to retain its colonial holdings, and the United States, which had already begun to expand its borders across the continent, would soon consider California as part of its destiny. The tensions between these imperial powers would make California a geopolitical battleground, one where Britain's interests were almost certainly doomed to fail. In the context of history, the discovery of this plaque challenges much of what is assumed about California's colonial past. Traditionally, the narrative has focused heavily on Spanish and Mexican control, with Britain largely relegated to the periphery of the story. Shin's find casts a new light on this history. While Spain and Mexico dominated California for much of its colonial era, the British had also played a role in shaping its early development, albeit more quietly. The British influence, however limited, had far-reaching consequences. If Britain had succeeded in its designs on California, the entire trajectory of the region's development could have been different. British control might have meant a slower, more methodical colonization, one more centered on trade and commerce than the rapid expansion and settlement that defined the American frontier. British California might have seen a different demographic makeup, with more British settlers and a potentially more diverse range of international influences, including Canadian and Pacific Islander populations. Perhaps even more intriguing is the question of what might have happened had Britain been the primary colonial power in California. Would the state have joined the British Empire, or would it have been independent for a time before aligning with the United States? What would have been the economic and cultural implications of a British-dominated California? Would the gold rush, the defining moment of California's development, have played out differently under British rule? Today, the plaque itself rests in a carefully preserved part of California's historical landscape. Following Shin's discovery, the site was excavated and analyzed, revealing more about its origins and the significance of the British claim. The plaque, though now corroded and eroded by over a century of coastal winds and salt water, remains a point of interest for historians and visitors alike. It is a symbol of forgotten possibilities, an artifact that offers a glimpse into a parallel history, one where Britain could have been the primary power in California. For Shin, the plaque remains a reminder of how easily history can be forgotten, buried beneath the very soil it helped shape. In a small, seemingly insignificant moment, she unearthed a piece of the puzzle that connects the past to the present. Her discovery serves as a touchstone for a broader discussion on the ways in which history is shaped, often through small, unnoticed events. The plaque that Shin unearthed calls into question the way we remember colonization and territorial expansion, reminding us of how borders are drawn and how they might have been drawn differently. Her discovery has become a touchstone in discussions about colonialism, territorial ambition, and the ways in which history is shaped by the forces of exploration and power. For all the pages written on the Spanish missions and the Mexican era, the British claim is a fleeting, almost forgotten whisper in the grand narrative of California's past. Yet it is just as important as any other. The plaque and its discovery serve as a testament to the fluidity of history, where empires rise and fall, and the boundaries of nations are often drawn in the sand. Beryl Shin's picnic turned out to be not just a leisurely escape into the past, but a moment that forever changed our understanding of what might have been. A British California, a forgotten chapter in the ever-shifting story of the American West.